They sure can. I mean, look, the number one thing they say is how Howie Roseman's not a good GM. I put him in my top 5 GMs as well. So I'm kind of kissing their butt and also, I guess disagreeing with them in some respects as well.
Yeah, I put Howie in my top 5 GMs. I never got so much hate, Brad. Never got so much hate in my life.
I believe it.
Appreciate you streaming in here on Merge 365. John McMullen Jody McDonald, joined by Brad Spielberger from Pro Football Focus, does contributing for overthecap.com as well. How's your summer going there, big guy?
It's going pretty well. How about you guys?
Doing well, Brad. Good to see you. Now, tell the truth. You did your top 32 contracts in the NFL. You kissing a little, what, with the Eagles fans. They can be vicious if you say bad things about the Eagles.
They sure can. I mean, look, the number one thing they say is how Howie Roseman's not a good GM. I put him in my top 5 GMs as well. So I'm kind of kissing their butt and also, I guess disagreeing with them in some respects as well.
Yeah, I put Howie in my top 5 GMs. I never got so much hate, Brad. Never got so much hate in my life.
I believe it.
All right, Brad, you did put Jordan Mailata's contract as the best valued contract in the National Football League, and 3 of us agree Howie Roseman should get a ton of credit for that. How high is high for Mailata? Are we talking about 5 years straight, Pro Bowl type production, all pro stuff? How good do you think Mailata could be to make his contract the best value contract in the National Football League?
Yeah, I really think he has the ability to be one of, if not the best tackles in the NFL. I discussed in that ranking that was based off of 700 snaps actually on an NFL field. They went ahead and gave him that early extension. I remember hearing he looked like the best player in camp that offseason before this extension, the 4-year, $64 million deal, which he'll now start to play on this year. And I recall hearing that, and a lot of people thought, as you guys know, last year the Eagles were not going to be a good football team by any stretch of the imagination. And I had one person say, being the best player on that practice field doesn't mean a whole lot. And obviously, they ended up being a playoff team. And long story short, I think he can be one of the best tackles in football because he's 6'8" and 360 whatever pounds, and is really good in the run game and as a pass protector. It's not like he's a one-dimensional guy. Jeff Stoutland, the offensive line coach there, has worked wonders the last several years with a lot of players. I think he has room to grow and is already, graded out for us as one of the best tackles in football.
Now, there was another Eagle in your top 32, but before we get to that, I want to go into Howie's philosophy of sort of identifying players, as you mentioned early, trying to get them done early. From this perspective, Brad, we had Andrew Brandt on last week. Was it last? Yeah, last week, Jody. And he mentioned a little something that NFL teams were a little bit upset with the Eagles over the A.J. Brown extension from the perspective of, Tyreek Hill was on his 3rd deal, Devontae Adams, whatever. And he was still on his rookie deal waiting for his extension. And that upset teams a little bit, which I can understand. But this is typical Eagles MO. They just did it with somebody outside the organization. They had to pick him up, acquire him. Because if you go back to last year, the 218 class, it was not only Mailata, it was Josh Sweat, it was Avonte Maddox, it was Dallas Goedert. They got him done early. So if you think about if the Eagles drafted A.J. Brown in 2019, he would have been up for that early extension before this season. So they beat it by a couple months. But if I say to you, teams were upset about the A.J. Brown extension, do you agree with that? Or do you think that's just sour grapes?
Not at all, because there are teams that are not willing to kind of put their necks out and be proactive and be the first team to market. There are a few teams, the Eagles being one of them, that don't just kind of let things settle around them and then go ahead and advance negotiations and get these deals done. They should thank the Eagles all the time for establishing markets, and then they can react to them and go back to their player and say, here's now where it's at, because a couple of these smart teams that are actually proactive and do their own work have kind of established where we're at. So I get what they're saying. I understand, where they're coming from in terms of him getting that $25 million per year value. Even though the last year of the deal does have a kind of a big inflated salary, but nevertheless, you also have to consider when you trade for a player, especially when you trade top end capital like a first round pick, that player adds a lot of leverage. The Eagles, again, were smart to not wait a season like we're looking at with Orlando Brown right now, holding the Chiefs hostage, like Jamal Adams did with the Seattle Seahawks. You go down the list of players that were acquired for first-round picks or more, and then the team waited a season, that player played well, and then they took them, hostage and held them for ransom. So for Philadelphia to agree to that deal as a part of the trade is, again, a sharp move. Yes, it was a top-of-market deal, but now Deebo Samuel, DK Metcalf, maybe Terry McLaurin, all those guys have a new market they're looking for and are pointing to that contract. That's probably the teams that are pissed off at them. But, if I'm the Eagles, who cares?
All right, here's who cares a year down the road. What kind of numbers does A.J. Brown have to put up this year to justify the contract? Where we come back next year and go, yeah, see, Howie Roseman ahead of the game. He was thinking outside the box. He ended up getting a bargain. Or what was Howie Roseman thinking? He got ahead. Now A.J. Brown. What kind of numbers did A.J. Brown have to put up for us to say, yes, just another thinking ahead, Howie Roseman beat the rest of the market type deal?
After all that praise, I will say I think there's more risk in this move than a lot of folks are considering. I want to say A.J. Brown has had both of his knees operated on already at this point. He obviously misses time pretty much every season. Never, the whole season, but he has not played, if I remember correctly, a full 16-game slate through his first 3 years in the league. So there is definitely some risk involved. I would say this. He's got to be, one of the better receivers on a per-game basis, putting up, a couple 100-yard outings and scoring the football. But I also think the big thing here is he can be your number one X up on the line, going up against press coverage, and that enables you to then get more value out of a Devontae Smith, obviously, a first-round pick in his own right, to then move him around, to not be able to have number one corners going up against him, to have him off the line of scrimmage and not facing as much press coverage and getting those free releases and using his athleticism and his route running ability that we all talk about so much, that will be amplified. So, yes, he needs to produce in his own right, but I also think he is a force multiplier for this offense in that everyone else around him can eat a little bit more because of the attention he commands.
Well, I would go. My concern with AJ's contract, Brad, as you mentioned, Devontae Smith. Now it's down the road; you don't have to worry about it for a couple of years. But if Devontae Smith develops into the player a lot of people think he could be, including myself and Jody, don't know where you are with Devontae, but if he turns into a star player, can you pay two wide receivers in the modern NFL at a top tier level?
So it would be going in. So 2 more years would be required until he's due for that early extension because he's a first round pick. Obviously, the 3rd-year option or the 5th-year option, is at your disposal as well. So you could stagger it to where entering A.J. Brown's 3rd contract year would be the 1st year of a potential new extension for Devontae Smith. Or you could say, look, we're going to let you play out that 4th season because we have that 5th-year option, and you'd still be going into, another year of cheaper control. So I think it is tough to pay 2 receivers $20 million plus, or even $15 million plus to 2 guys. I think Seattle right now with DK Metcalf is probably struggling, thinking about Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf without even knowing who their quarterback is and all those considerations. But I think the 4-year term of A.J. Brown's deal enables them to basically, when Smith comes up, if he grows into the player we think he can be, they can then kind of phase, A.J. Brown out and then bring in Devontae Smith's money in.
All right, Brad, the other guy that you had on the Eagles in your top 32 value quarterback rankings on PFF was Dallas Goedert. And again, the Eagles seem to be ahead of the curve. The tight end market hasn't exploded like the wide receiver market, but it's grown pretty damn quickly with guys getting franchise tags, which I'm not sure they're, in my evaluation, franchise type players. Why do you think the Goddard deal is as good as it is?
Well, you nailed it right there. I mean, for David Njoku to sign a deal that's just below Dallas Goedert, is crazy. I mean, Dallas Goedert is a better player in every facet of football, is more productive as a receiver, and is a better blocker in the run game. And so, again, them and the Ravens with Mark Andrews are smart to get those deals done. I also think, George Kittle and Travis Kelce, kind of like Gronk back in the day, they are obviously probably the best tight ends in football right now, and their deals are suppressing the market. And I think, the Eagles were smart to get those deals done when they did, because eventually someone is going to come through and break the glass ceiling on that tight end market. But for now, to get them below $15 million per year, they're making less than, guys like Hunter Renfrow as slot receivers. We're not even talking about, A.J. Browns and outside X guys. We're talking about slot receivers, which are arguably tight ends that don't have to block as much and kind of have similar responsibilities on the inside. So, yeah, just again, getting ahead of the market before maybe Gesicki or now maybe Dalton Schultz in Dallas try to break through that $15 million per year number that George Kittle has. Eventually someone's going to, but, Philly has a couple years of control left on a really good player in Dallas Goedert.
Want to look at your top 5 as a whole when you look at the best contracts, and you have Mike Evans from Tampa Bay, Darren Waller from Las Vegas, Cortland Sutton from Denver, Rob Havenstein, the offensive tackle from the Rams. And I'll even throw Patrick Mahomes, because I think obviously that's an interesting one at number 6. And I agree. People don't realize how team friendly that deal was. If there's a theme to that top 5, Brad, what is it? And it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, where we're talking about sort of the Eagles getting ahead. This seems to be guys on their contract, overplaying their value, or I'm mistaken that.
I think it's a little bit of both. Like, for example, Cortland Sutton, I mean, the Broncos, to sign him to an extension in November of last year, and there have now been 12 players at wide receiver that have signed bigger contracts than him in the last 6 months. That's, again, a timing thing where that was just remarkably well done by their new general manager and George Payton. But, yeah, for Mike Evans, for example, I think part of that, too, is not only has he outplayed it, he's never had fewer than 1,000 receiving yards going into his 8th NFL season, but also the wide receiver market explodes, and he's still on that deal. I do think it's possible he signs an extension before the season, especially now with his teammate and Chris Godwin making $20 million a year, and he's still on that old deal. But, yeah, get it early is a huge part of it. Outplaying it is a huge part of it. And then, of course, just, if the market explodes and you're still on your original deal, it just gets better and better from a value standpoint. That applies to Rob Havenstein at right tackle. He also was signed right before that market took off. And now there's maybe a half dozen guys making double what he's making.
All right, Brad, I need you to clarify something for me. Know how great you are with the cap. We'll find out if you understand the penalty aspects of the NFL is tied to the cap as well, because this whole Deshaun Watson thing is confusing me. Was reported this week that if the NFL sticks to its guns, as it leaked out this week, they'd like a minimum of a year on the sidelines for Deshaun Watson. And hearing starts today, and we'll get more info on it over the next week to 2 weeks. But if they get the year, or if they had agreed to a year, because they did negotiate a settlement, they tried, neither side could agree, so that's why they're going for this hearing. But they could have negotiated it out ahead of time. And if it had been a full year, then the contract would toll, that this year wouldn't even count, that he would still be under contract for the next 5 years, starting in 2023 rather than 2022. If that's the case, who and how is the fine being paid this year? Because he would be held responsible for his contract. That's how he would be fined. That's what he would lose, which we were told is only like the veteran minimum, and all the rest of it is in a signing bonus. How does all that work? If the contract doesn't count, if he's out for the entire year and you just say, all right, contract doesn't pick up to 2023, how is he paying the fines? Who is paying the fines this year for the year that he's on the sidelines?
Yeah, so a fine would not necessarily be taking back or recouping money owed in his actual NFL contract. It would be a fine that he has to, find that cash wherever he has it. Obviously, he's still getting the $45
right, but let me ask you a question.
signing.
Let me ask you a question. Does anybody do it that way? It's my understanding when a player has to pay a fine, it comes directly from the team. The team takes it out of his contract. They don't cut him the check that he usually gets for his salary on a given year. So you tell me Deshaun Watson's going to have to get out a pen and write a check for the National Football League this year?
Yeah, so he still received a $45 million signing bonus. So that money is still his, even if the contract tolls. It's not like the cash owed for that would get pushed back as well. So, like you said, it could come from the team. But no, in that scenario where it's a direct fine under the personal conduct policy to a player, yeah, it's just come up with this cash and pay us this cash.
Okay.
You obviously have it on hand. And then, yeah, that is correct, that he would basically, and maybe the Browns thought about this because it obviously benefits them.
Well,
they
they
still
thought
get
about
5
it,
years
yeah.
of control, starting next year. So they actually don't lose out on a year of the contract. They, in reality, keep them even longer, which maybe you could argue then like a 12-game suspension could arguably be worst case scenario because they flush this season and don't get control in 2028 or whatever year they would add by the contract tolling.
Yeah, I don't know if Andrew Berry wanted to sign Deshaun Watson. I'm kind of sure that Kevin Stefanski wasn't in love with it, but I know Andrew thought about it. He thought about all these implications. Just a tremendously smart cap guy, and obviously he was here in Philadelphia for a short period. I also want to talk about Deshaun from a different perspective, Brad. We talked about the Eagles upsetting some people. Well, the Browns upset a lot of people in the NFL. And with Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert coming down the pike, this escrow rule of guaranteed money, how dramatically does it affect the league as a whole? Because I think a lot of people think about owners and thinking they're all rich, and they are, but there are different levels of rich in the NFL. And a guy like Jimmy Haslam's worth billions. Here in Philadelphia, Jeffrey Lurie, there's much more well-heeled owners, David Tepper, Stan Kroenke, but the Spanoses, the Bengals, the Browns, they don't have, oh, we got to come up with $250 million. We got to give our quarterback $50 million up front and put $200 million more in escrow at that moment. Is that possible? Does that shift the landscape that the salary cap was supposed to cure? In other words, keep that even playing field. Does that shift it to a little bit more uneven? Because they're going to have to take out loans.
I think it does more in theory than actual practice. So like you said, I mean, there's simply probably no chance that the Chargers or Bengals will agree to a fully guaranteed deal extending into year 3, 4, 5, maybe year 3 because it's a quarterback, but certainly not the 4th and 5th year. I do not think they established a precedent that everyone's going to go after now. I still think the precedent will be the rolling guarantee structure that we saw with Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen, where, you're in 2022, your 2024 guarantees kick in and so on and so forth. So you're still protected multiple years down the road, but that kind of circumvents the necessity to get all this capital and all this cash and put it into escrow. Because like you said, those owners, their main source of income is the team itself. They're not independently wealthy like a Stan Kroenke, like a Jeffrey Lurie that can just throw money, if they need to. So I think, like I said, more in theory in that the veil of, hey, we can't, give you this guarantees 5 years down the road because this escrow thing prevents us from doing so. The Haslam's kind of blew that out of the water, right? I mean, they gave literally more than double. Aaron Rodgers set the record with $101 million fully guaranteed at signing, and Deshaun Watson a couple weeks later, 230. More than double that. So it kind of takes the veil away, but will it establish a precedent that other players point to and say, I know you can do it, so you have to do it? No, I really don't think so. And especially those owners, they just simply cannot do it.
But real quick follow-up, if you're the agent for Joe or Justin Herbert, I mean, don't you have to go in there and say, okay, he got 230 million. I got to start at 235.
110%. Yes, you will ask for it because then when you don't get it, you'll say, well, I'm conceding on this, so you're going to give me this instead, and you'll get all sorts of great cash payout structures. And like I said, the rolling guarantees, you'll say, well, all right, then in 2025, I want my 2028 money to then kick in and become guaranteed and stuff like that. So yes, they will absolutely, you'd be negligent as an agent not to come in and argue that at the outset, even knowing you're not going to get it 100%.
Brad, don't know how many of those we have on the stream right now know this, but I know this, and if I didn't bring it up, I think I'd be negligent to them. Washington Commanders, 10 wins? What? What did you... The Washington Commanders are going to win 10 games this year? You know that Carson Wentz is going to be their quarterback this year, right? How'd you come up with 10 wins for Washington?
Yeah, so I am higher on the team than a lot of people. And I'm, like I said in a follow-up tweet, there's no way that blows up in my face, right? Look, I think
on this show it's going to, yes.
Well, for sure. Yeah, no, that I expected. Yeah, I mean, look, Carson Wentz obviously, was awful his last year in Philadelphia. I think last year he wasn't good, and he never put the team on his back, but I don't think he was as bad as people are making him out to be. He's become kind of a game manager, not really going to elevate the talent around him, but if there is talent around him, I think he can be okay. And I think people are kind of underestimating that roster around him. Obviously got to extend Terry McLaurin, but it's a good offensive line. They would have good weapons if Terry is back. And the defense was just so bad last year, has to be at least closer to league average with all the talent they have around them. Look, if they win 6 games, I wouldn't be surprised either. We've seen guys like Alex Smith come out and say the fact there's a new scandal and all these distractions every single week does not help. And that's currently obviously at the forefront of their minds with Dan Snyder, dodging subpoenas and whatever he's doing. But look, from a pure talent standpoint on the football field, I think it's a pretty talented roster.
Yeah, I'm with you, Brad. I think, and I've talked about their defensive line. Now, Chase Young hasn't lived up to expectations, but, he's still good when he was healthy. And obviously, Jonathan Allen, Deron Payne, Montez Sweat was hurt last year as well. Tremendous talent up front on that side of the football. But yeah, man, off the field, I mean, they're dealing with so much stuff. I don't know how Ron Rivera keeps it together. But I do think they're more talented than most people think. That I would agree on. I'll leave it here with you. And follow Brad on Twitter at PFF_Brad. Read him at Pro Football Focus. Does a tremendous job over the cap as well. We talk about the Eagles all the time being very sort of proactive and forward thinking when it comes to contracts. When you're putting together your top contracts, did you notice any other teams consistently good, or who are the teams that are most consistently good when it comes to contracts and manipulating the cap?
Yeah, the Buffalo Bills are also extremely proactive. Tre'Davious White got signed, I want to say a week before Jalen Ramsey, and it was $17.25 million per year for White. And then, Ramsey blew the market up right after. Matt Milano at linebacker they signed right before Darius Leonard and Fred Warren, all those guys. I could go on the list of a couple names there, and the Baltimore Ravens as well. I mentioned earlier, we're talking about Dallas Goedert. They did the same thing with Mark Andrews. They've done it with a couple other guys as well. So in terms of proactivity and getting out ahead and trying to get guys signed early, those teams, are the ones that come to mind right away.
Yeah, the Washington defensive line will be good if one of them doesn't decapitate the other on the sidelines like they tried to do last year. And their offensive line is pretty damn good. Except they lost their best player in Brandon Scherf. So, yes, I disagree with you, Brad. If you want 9.5 over, I'll cover whatever you want on the Commanders coming up this season. I just don't think they're.
What odds you give me?
Yeah, I got to give you odds because most places have them at like 6.5, where they should be. So we'll negotiate that later. We talked about Jalen Hurts earlier in the show. And the fact that you can't get a great read on this guy as a practice player because they blow the ball dead in practice, and that's a big part of Jalen Hurts' game. Well, everyone is expecting a step-up season and for him to be better. How much do you think that better is going to include running the football as much as he did last year? If they're going to throw it, that means he's going to individually run it less that is one of the strengths he has. After Lamar Jackson, he's probably the second best running quarterback in the National Football League. How do you think that balance is going to work this year with the Eagles to get the right number of throws in, for Jalen to show that he's that much better, for the Eagles to move the ball that much more efficiently, but also not take his strength away from him because he can make plays with his legs? How challenging do you think that's going to be for the Eagles this year?
Yeah, it is a tough balance because you obviously want to protect him. You don't want him to have to use his legs all the time because in theory he's throwing the ball well and moving the ball through the air. I would say that the goal really is to, let his scrambling ability as opposed to his designed running ability kind of take over and give him the green light to say, if nothing's available and you're maybe you're rolling out or it's play action or whatever the case may be, take off if you want to. Because like you said, that is a big part of your value. It's a big aspect of why you're a good quarterback. But no, you do not want him to still be known by the end of the season as one of the better running quarterbacks and for that to be a big part of his value. If that's still the narrative, I would say that's not a good thing long-term for him or the Philadelphia Eagles. At a certain point, he's got to be a guy that can go into Tampa Bay in the playoffs and use his arm to win them a game. You can't rely on a running quarterback, all the time against top defenses in big games.
BS, great stuff. We appreciate it. Whenever you come on, thanks for jumping on today. We're certainly going to get you on before the year starts. Enjoy the rest of your summer, bud.
You too. Thank you.
Thanks.